Chapter 15. Marcel showed the silver bell to his parents. "That was very thoughtful of her," said his mother. "She knew it would be useful to you, and she wanted you to have it," added his father. Using one of Papa's screwdrivers and a pair of screws from the toolbox, Marcel attached the bell to the beat-up old bike he was now using. He still missed the bike he'd traded away, but he wasn't sorry he'd let it go. Not a bit. It was worth it. And then a few weeks later, at Christmas, Papa and Mama surprised him with a new bicycle. Well, it wasn't new. Money was very tight, and they could not have afforded a brand new one, but its bottle green frame was in pretty good shape, and the seat, which had only a few marks on it, was made of real leather. "Thank you, thank you, thank you," Marcel cried as he wheeled it around the room. "Careful you don't knock anything over," Mama said. She moved aside the 3 wooden shoes that they had set out Christmas Eve for Père Noël to fill. "I want to ride it right now," he said. "Don't worry, you'll have a chance to ride it soon enough," said Mama. And then she fixed them crepes filled with the remains of a jar of preserves she'd been hoarding. They tasted so good. After they ate, they all went off to hear Mass at church. It was only later in the day that Marcel was able to ride, and the first thing he did was to pedal over to Arnaud's house to show off his gift. "That is some bike you've got there," Arnaud said. "It sure beats that old wreck you've been riding." "It sure does," Marcel agreed happily. "And it's going to beat you, too, when we start racing again. You wait and see." "Don't count on it," said Arnaud. "In case you've forgotten, I'm still pretty fast." "But neither of us are as fast as Delphine," Marcel said, his high spirits suddenly evaporating. "No, we're not," agreed Arnaud. There was a silence, but it was not uncomfortable. Then Arnaud asked, "Did you ever find out what happened to her? I mean, she just disappeared. We never saw her again." "No, we didn't," said Marcel, and technically this was the truth. But even if it hadn't been, he would have maintained the fiction. He couldn't risk revealing the real story to his friend, even now. Later, back at home, Marcel asked his father if he knew anything about what had happened to Delphine's family. "I didn't hear that they were caught," said his father. "So that means they got to Spain and that they're all right?" His father shook his head. "I wish I could tell you that was true, but in all honesty, I can't. I only know I didn't hear about anything bad happening to them. So that makes it easier to believe that nothing bad did." Marcel understood. He just wasn't going to get a better answer than that. He'd simply have to live with not knowing. "At least we tried," he said to his father. "At least we tried as hard as we could." "We certainly did," said his father. "Especially you, Marcel." Papa put his hand on his shoulder, just like he would have with one of his friends or another man. Marcel felt good knowing that they had tried as hard as they did, and basking in the warm glow of his father's pride felt good too. January and February were long, cold months, with a lot more snow and ice than usual. Marcel wasn't able to ride the new green bike as much as he would have liked. Still, he continued to carry messages for his parents in loaves of bread. Even though Delphine and her family had gone, the work of the resistance went on. Then there was a day in early March that was surprisingly mild, with temperatures hovering around 10 degrees Celsius. Sitting at his desk in school, Marcel couldn't help looking at the window to where he could hear a flock of birds twittering in the branches of a nearby tree. What a nice sound. After school, he would take his bicycle out for a spin. It was warm enough. As soon as the bell rang, he picked up his satchel and headed out of the building. He passed Thierry, but the bigger boy just scowled and let him pass without a word. Ever since their exchange back in December, Thierry hadn't bothered him. Maybe Guillaume was right. All it took to scare a bully was to give him a taste of his own medicine. Walking down his street, he waved to his parents, who were both busy behind the counter of the bakery. He then hurried up the stairs, where he dropped his bag. He was hungry, but he was even more eager to get on the bike. He'd eat later, he decided, and went downstairs to hop on. What a feeling! The first ride after a break felt so good, so thrilling. Marcel knew that February and March were crucial early season training periods for the Tour de France riders. These were the months when the cyclists rode long hours to accumulate as many kilometers in their legs as possible to gear up for the big racing season. He sped along at a good pace, enjoying the feel of the almost spring air that filled his lungs. The new bike handled very well, and soon he was out of town. The days were getting longer, just a few brief minutes a day, but the afternoons no longer seemed to end so abruptly with that heavy curtain of black that fell at 4 o'clock. Marcel rode and rode, pumping his legs, pushing hard on the pedals. The sun on his face made his mood even better. Maybe soon the war would end and the occupation would be over. The Tour de France would return to France and fill the roads with agile cyclists and adoring fans. Maybe Delphine would even come back and they would watch it together, cheering at the sidelines for their favorite athletes. But he didn't even know what had happened to her. Marcel was not paying attention to how far he'd ridden and was surprised when he realized he'd reached the little village where he had gotten a flat tire and traded his bike for that old wreck. Papa had ended up selling it for the parts. The bike itself was pretty useless. As he passed through the town square, he slowed down. There was a fountain, now dry, and a street of shops. 2 German soldiers stood on the corner, and as Marcel rode by, they were joined by a third. He turned away toward the bistro on the other side of the square. There was a lone French gendarme at one table and a couple of old men at another, each immersed in a newspaper. One of them smoked a pipe, and the smell of the smoke floated through the air. And then, to his utter surprise, Marcel saw the boy with whom he traded bikes. His hair was shorter now and he was a bit taller, but Marcel recognized him in an instant. The boy was even riding Marcel's old bike. He recognized that too. When the boy caught sight of him, he came right over. "Salut," he said. "Hello." "Salut," replied Marcel. "That's a great-looking bike," said the boy. "Is it new?" "It was a Christmas present," Marcel said, "from my parents." The boy looked it over appreciatively. "What happened to the one you got from me?" "My father ended up selling it," said Marcel, looking at his old bike. "How's that one? Do you still like it?" "It's terrific," said the boy. "It handles really well. You were right. It was a good deal." "For me, too," thought Marcel, but he didn't say this out loud. "By the way," said the boy, "did you ever make it to your aunt's house that night? Was your cousin all right?" "Yes," said Marcel, "and she's fine now." Marcel was uncomfortable at having to tell yet another lie to the boy, but it kept Delphine and her family safe. How he wished he knew if she was still safe. He said goodbye to the boy and got back on his bike. It was just getting dark, and the air had cooled down considerably by the time he got home. It was only March after all. Winter was not over. He mounted the stairs quickly in search of a snack. He was starved. There wasn't much to tempt him, though, some stale bread and an apple that had gone soft, but he sat down at the table to eat anyway. Then he saw it. The letter, propped up against the earthenware bowl. It was addressed to him. Mail? Now that was something that didn't happen too often. Almost never, in fact. Marcel picked it up to look more closely. There was no return address, but the postmark and the stamps indicated it was from Portugal. Portugal? That was near Spain, where Delphine and her family had been headed. Could it be? Ignoring his bread and mushy apple, he tore open the envelope. Inside, there was no letter and no note, only a brightly colored sheet of paper folded into thirds. When he opened it, he saw it was a page torn from a magazine or a catalog of some kind. It showed a smiling girl riding a shiny red bicycle. Strapped to the front of the bicycle was a wicker basket, and inside the basket was a tabby cat. Marcel looked more closely at the girl in the picture. She had blonde curls and blue eyes. Delphine's hair was black, but her eyes were blue. And like the girl in the picture, she had a cat, the ginger kitty that now kept the bakery mouse-free. It was Delphine who had sent this to him. It all fit. The girl, the bike, and the cat. She was sending a message to say she had escaped and that she was all right. He was as sure of it as he was of his own name. Relief rushed over him like a wave, and mixed in with the relief was admiration. How clever she was to have found this way to communicate. No one else in this whole world would have understood the meaning of this picture, no one but Marcel. He refolded the page and slipped it back into the envelope before heading downstairs. The bakery was busy, so this wasn't the moment to show Mama and Papa the good news he'd gotten. He would tell them later, when the three of them were alone. He knew that they would be as filled with happiness as he was at this moment. He wondered whether he'd ever see Delphine again. He hoped so, but even if he didn't, he knew he would never forget her. The end.